Good afternoon and most welcome to 1482 of the series. I will do, as I often like to, a little cross-reading from the text that we previously went deep into by Hans Ruin. The passivity of reason on Heidegger's concept of Stimmung, and a text by Elio da Motta, Chirality and Neutrinos. I will compare these and see what depth comes out of this. But I first start with Hans Ruin's article at page 155, and I am at the second paragraph. Before that we ended in 1476. We have been discussing Kierkegaard, angst, anxiety, and how it puts body and soul together. It's, so to speak, the unifier. And that we usually generalize this, we make it, I think there is a psychological term called to make it global, that is universal. In Heidegger, this is fairly equivalent with das Mann. And according to Kierkegaard, angst lies in the very foundation of reality. So I will now continue my read, second paragraph, page 155. At this point, we seem to be very far removed indeed from Aristotle. To ascribe a philosophically founding role to finitude and the fear of death would be absurd from the perspective of classical reason. In rhetoric, we noted how Aristotle speaks of fear as one of the basic moods of man. Observing that it is a feeling always proportionate to the distance to that which provokes it. That is very important. The feeling is proportionate, comes in equal proportion to the distance to what provokes it. For this reason, men do not fear death, even though it might be imminent. However, there is another way in which Heidegger can still claim to justly connect to Aristotle. In his emphasis on the proper mood of philosophical thinking, namely in his aforementioned famous dictum that philosophical thought begins in wonder. Thomasein. Thomasein?
Thomasein.
Thomasein. There is always a first impetus. It starts with something. The implications of this remark are not obvious. unless we are not already explicitly attentive to the problem of moods. But when red from the perspective of a Heideggerian analysis of moods, the ominous ring of this apparently simple remark rises to the forefront. So the mood, my comment, comes first, and it's deciding everything. It is foundational. The first igniter. Listen now. Philosophy has its origin not in an act of reason, but in a certain emotional displacement vis-à-vis being as such, in wonder, that is. Do you remember this? I will get back to that. That there is a primordial igniter to everything, including philosophy. Koma sein. This wonder opens a philosophical adventure, and as such it also marks the point to which philosophy must always return. That's one of the footnotes here, 26. It's about the qualified mood of angst. It is so important, I will include it in the read. And it's about methodological. The word methodological here must be understood in a somewhat ironic mood. For what Heidegger's account implies is rather a fundamental lack of methodology. Anxiety is not a mood we can use or exploit for our own intellectual profit. Rather, it marks a loss into which we are precisely thrown, from which we have to recover. what it presents to us is not any specific insight or truth, but rather the world as a whole, as a problem. But also in this respect, it can still be said to constitute a parallel to the wonder of the ancients. End of footnote. It is only by installing oneself in the opening of this wonder that the overall sense of the philosophical quest can be beheld. From this one, or from this, one could justly argue opening of this wonder that the overall sense of the philosophical quest can be beheld. that already in Aristotle, the founding gesture of speculative reason is the fact of being thrown into a certain mood. A Stimmung. This argument is not found in Sein und Zeit. Where Aristotle is rather posited as the forerunner of a theoretical attitude for which the reality of Daseinsbefindlichkeit is not experienced. And he's referring to amnesia, of course, here. The forgetfulness of the Seinsfrage. However, in the aforementioned lecture series from 1924, such a formulation occurs almost verbatim. When he states, that thinking, nuin, is in a certain sense a pathos. Solicited and encroached upon by the world. And 10 years after Sein und Zeit, he will again return precisely to this argument in a lecture series from 1937 entitled The Basic Problems of Philosophy. Here, Heidegger argues repeatedly for the need to reawaken a basic attunement or mood. A Grundstimmung of philosophizing itself. Also very important. It's a Grundstimmung and it's about philosophizing itself. and to those who might object that this is only a psychological matter. He adds that it might seem less fantastic once we recognize that the Greek thinkers themselves say that the origin of philosophy that for the sake of which it began was the Thomasine. Remember what we mentioned before, do not equal these to psychological states. This is once more repeated. It's not a subjective nor a psychological state. Which Heidegger translates as Erstaunen. However, this remark does not exhaust the question of the sense of this Greek origin. On the contrary, On the contrary, according to Heidegger, the sense of this original opening is not accessible to us today. This is very important. It has gone into coverage. We have two things to remember so far. It is a first primordial move, if you want. And the second is the sense of this original opening is not accessible to us today. We are too far removed from its way. $2,500 of expanding creativity, thinking, hundreds or millions of books. Our very way of being has changed, and even has its own history. For us, the task is therefore to reawaken a new basic attunement. A new basic attunement. A new Grundstimmung, as I mentioned before. From which our questions can crystallize. In fact, much of Heidegger's work during the 30s, the extremely creative period, that included his monumental lecture series on Hölderlin and Nietzsche. Are devoted in different ways precisely to this question of the original attunement that supposedly determines our specific position in history. Last half of that sentence is determinative of what I want to say next. That history here is Geschichte, what makes us, not at all Historia. Eventually, he drops the emphasis on anxiety that we find in Sein und Zeit. Instead, he tries to explicate the attunement that defines modern existence. With a presupposition that it is only by taking upon ourselves the destiny inherent in this attunement that we can have a philosophical grasp of our situation and develop an original thinking in the present. This is also an important sentence. points to that, as I mentioned earlier, in 1476, that using the theoretical mood on other things than what it is supposed to creates this forgetfulness of the original Grundstimmung, the first originator or pusher. Heidegger wants to reawaken this. You can think of it as being dormant, asleep. And Aristotle, as I mentioned from page 155, in his emphasis on the proper mode of philosophical thinking, namely in his aforementioned dictum, famous dictum, that philosophical thought begins in wonder, in Thomasein. So there are two things here. A first igniter, a first primordial mover of everything, that decides everything. And second is that this is no longer open to us. It has been covered up. But still it determines everything we do, think, and what is Sein, being. But it shuts down the why question or the origin. After that, we have passed a lot in this lecture series. We get Seiendes, beings, and we are left with what, where, how, but no longer the primordial, foundational question. pause there. I make a summary here mid-lecture, and to be absolutely clear, I would be tediously once more repeating to pound in what I'm getting at. The famous aforementioned dictum that philosophical thought begins in wonder, Thoma sein. That is a mood before all other mood. It lies in the Geschichte, in what has been done before. A first decision. Should I go to the left, or should I go to the right? Thoma sein is the first energy, the impetus, the wonder. And this starts everything by sort of hiding itself. As I read before, the sense of this original opening is not accessible to us today. Heidegger puts a tremendous effort to make this clear. And this supposedly determines our specific position in history. I would like to compare this to what we find in physics, geometry, mathematics, all subjects. Something that is so original that it cannot even be called psychic nor corporal. It is definitely before that. It's the first decider of everything. After that deciding act, we only have up, down, and front and back. It fits neatly with the questions where, what, how, but not with a unifying, I would almost say omnipotent question, why? Compare this to handedness. I simplified a bit my original attempt. I would go into it more. But the parallel is rather interesting, you'll see. Handedness, or chirality as Lord Kelvin named it, after the Greek word for hand. We have proof A, or parallel A. It is the first twist that decides all. This stage, it suffers to say, it goes down to the very core of what we call physics and even mental, down to the elementary particles of thought, quarks, and it decides everything. Up, down, mass, length, shape, color, I could not find one of these interrogative pronouns, what, where, that it doesn't cover. It covers all, except the why, because it is at the very beginning. Left turn makes for a spiral that show the feature up. You see here, left hand spiraling has an inherent direction. A right hand spiral, a right hand spiral has the direction down. Together with left and right and up and down, you also go front and back, and you can go farther and farther, north, south, west, east. B. It was forgotten. Discovered and looked into superficially until the event of quantum physics. And it is most most definitely not making a difference between object and subject, which is another one of these beings question. Who? And it covers neatly where. So all the secondary questions comes after and also get properly answered. But the why question is covered up. The sense of this original opening is not accessible to us today, because once the first twist is made, I choose, or the Thomasein, the wonder choose. I look that direction, or I look that direction. Or as I think probably my colleague would have it, I decide to open, I won't mention the name of the box, but I decide to open it, or I decide not to. Why can't we see it? Why is it forgotten? It covers itself up neatly, because the mood, remember Grundstimmung or Erstaunen, the mood only allows all the other questions to come to fore. Where, what, how many, what weight, what length, res extensa. This, I would say, this is my opinion here, this starts or is before the Cartesian cut that has had such tremendous effects on our thinking. It can also be very easily shown by two hands, one right hand and one left hand. The right hand in this instance touching the left. It needs chirality, an original difference to do that. Otherwise, just sameness would appear, making this the perceived and this touching agency the perceiver. So it creates difference. Heidegger is hinting to that there is a before that is more primordial than difference, or if you like, it is difference itself. Another aspect I will come back to is that chirality, unlike all the other aspects, cannot be captured by a Cartesian coordinate system, or actually any system of description. And that makes it, in my sense, truly primordial. Maybe a comment from Kalle. Just careful not pinching you.
I will repeat something from page 156 from Hans Ruhn's paper. Much of Heidegger's work during the 30s, the extremely creative period that included his monumental lecture series on Hölderlin and Nietzsche, are devoted in different ways precisely to this question of the original attunement that supposedly determines our specific position history. Eventually he drops the emphasis on anxiety that we find in Simon's sight. Instead, he tries to explicate the attunement that defines modern existence. We spoke earlier in the previous lecture about anxiety. I had some problems because for Heidegger, anxiety is something positive, and my metaphor was that I would prefer to be in a beach in Florida and have pina colada in front of me. That is the bliss for me, and I prefer not to be anxious. Even so, I admit I sometimes seek anxiety. Today, Good Friday, I go to the movie theater and watch the Pope's Exorcist, a horror movie that's seeking anxiety or night dreams. But even so, I think I would replace anxiety with curiosity, but that's my own personal preference. But it's interesting that so in the 1930s Heidegger tries to find the original attunement, the perfect, or try to find what is the attunement. And to go to something else, I was thinking about this sign. This is the old German spelling for being, and what Heidegger and also what Heidegger and Nietzsche, Heidegger and Derrida did, they crossed over this. And I was thinking that here, what do we have here? You have the first letter of Heron, that is Her, which means hand. Chirality is the very word. In Greek you spell it with X. And it's perhaps not a chance or a coincidence that it begins with the same letter. You have the same letter also on Christ, for instance. And here I like to play with words like why, like in the English why question. You have the why question here about being. But for Heidegger, Heidegger wanted to transcend, or not transcend, but he wanted to ask what is the question of being. So he crossed over the word with an X, which you have in Chirality. Yes. And anatomically, now I want to ask an anatomical question. So here you have, let's say this is the Now this would be my right hand, so to say. This would be, so to say, connected to the left foot. Are they connected anatomically speaking? I don't know. In this case, they have more in common than, let's say, this and this. So say, could the right hand be more connected to the left foot, anatomically speaking, let's say, than the corresponding foot here on the right side? That could be interesting. The chirality is currently shows fundamental. It proves that asymmetry is something fundamental to the nature, but perhaps there is symmetry after all. It's both asymmetry and symmetry at the same time. I'll get back to you.
Very interesting. I didn't think of this. It could be she as well in the Greek letter. And I am not 100% sure, but I'm quite sure, as what you said is correct. I will check it out. But what we think about the body, or the X, if you like, is not as we commonly perceive. The spirals go through the body and makes connections that we are unaware of. And my first guesses here, or thoughts, is when we walk, we don't stand like this, like an X. We walk, and then of course it makes more sense that the left foot is connected to the right hand in movement. We are usually not what is it called, the vitreous man? By Da Vinci.
The Renaissance man, or whatever, they have different names. Vitruvius
man. And first I got a little surprise. In a way of seeing, there are only, let's see, 2 letters in the alphabet. There are not, at first look, Carol. One is O and the other one is X. I don't think there are more. But then when I thought about it, there is an inherent chirality in X. You do it like this, which makes for a movement. You could possibly make it like this and see the movement even clearer if you do it cursive. Some people do it like this. In that, the twist is, yeah, it's in a way it's very good, because my first thought was like being in the Zionans, the beings, and I could only ask the what and the weird question. I reach to the why question. Then I see the movement, the primordial ignitor of everything. The hand, the finger that moves. My wonder, my Thomasine, my interest nails things. And you could compare the forgetfulness with a bit more automated, mechanical reaching. So you get caught up in what, where, you get occupied. And you lose sight. So my first view on the X was it's non-chiral. But I realize if you go deeper into it, It is most definitely Cairo. And this is the forgetfulness. I don't even enter my Thomasan. It's still there, but it's too quick for me to catch. And in an odd way, it sort of take away my free will. I almost get conditioned. I know that's a strong word, but conditions to the Zayandans, the beings, the objects, as we talked about yesterday. We had a meeting with an Indian wise man yesterday. I wasn't allowed to make a recording, so I cannot dwell into that now, but in his language there are no nouns nor any adjectives, nor do they have adverbs. When he was 7 years of age, he learned English, and I asked him how that was. And he got this sort of occupied face, his forehead wrinkled, there's a tension just here, the twinkle of the eye. This could be, might go out on a limb here, but a 7-year-old's experience of the amnesia. He could not understand that everything was after. It felt dead. I think that could be close to the constant preoccupation Heidegger often refers to of everyday life, a certain busyness. And this busyness, it is not, you could be on a calm summer field and still have it. I don't refer to stress like in, often you get the picture of standing in a traffic line and horns beeping, booping. But the busyness is underneath it all, deeply hidden. And what Heidegger wants to do is to lift the Seinsfrage once more, show it to us. And of course, we will not lose, do not think that we will lose where and how many. The weight, it will become more nurtured we will be able to enter those things more forcefully or stronger, because we've gone into the Thomasein, the original curiosity. It was almost like his 7-year-old curiosity was quenched, and he felt sadness, I think it was his expression, certain sense of loss. The Seinsfrage, I think, is the renewal of that original freshness. And most definitely Heidegger took a step in that direction, as you mentioned, in the 30s. Oddly enough, in the 30s. But also within physics itself. Can imagine that would have been into the not so happy demeanor of Lord Kelvin himself, which gave rise to instigated chirality as a name. As you say, Kalle, I'm thinking further, sorry, it's but as you say, yeah, when you say anxiety and what it leads to next, especially Jean-Paul Sartre, is so preoccupied with this anxiety. Could it be, and this is just something I thought about now. That once you forget the Seinsfrage, what is left is anxiety, as the Indian felt at 7 years old. Because if everything around you is static, dead, as Sartre told, as he felt, the young Indian, that will, of course, lead to a sort of anxiety of tremendous magnitude. I think I'm going to let that thought come back to that, but it's rather interesting actually. Put a pause there as I continue. I would read, I was interested in this footnote 26. And the word methodological here must be understood in a somewhat ironic mood. For what Heidegger's account implies is rather a fundamental lack of methodology. And listen now. Anxiety is not a mood we can use or exploit for our own intellectual profit. Rather, it marks a loss into which we are precisely thrown. And, even more important here, and from which we have to recover. Once we realize, or once we stop this preoccupation enough to delve into the Seinsfrage, the discovery we make, and I think about both Heidegger, who expresses it differently, I'll mention it now, but for this 7-year-old, a shock almost. That in his initial shock can be turned into a recovery of the Seinsfrage amongst us living in, if you like, occupation or conditioning of beings and forgetfulness. He mentioned in their language there were no word for belief, nor hope. Belief could also be seen as compensation for a lack in a certain sense. That lack is in beings unsatisfying, not giving knowledge, not in ourselves. Heidegger most pertinently points to neither in physics, as from quantum mechanics, showing that beings or existences, atoms, are not what it is about. And most importantly, soul and body comes together only in this. Brings to mind some scientist that my colleague here recommended. It took me some time to get into him. His name was Wolfgang Smith, and he said that we are using Austrian hard words, under the slavery of the Cartesian cut. And that it was the most disastrous turn, and I like the word turn, because Heidegger is always pointing to that even the mood of choosing the theoretical, which is so highly criticized, is from the beginning wonder, although it's staled and become something that blocked knowledge, as in quantum mechanics, as in within ourselves. And it's been so forgotten in physics for 2000 years, maybe longer. Within ourselves for the same time. So maybe, and I have my intuition here, Kere is about recovery, going much further than the everyday busyness of life. And that the first anxiety is also finding Thomasein, and then recover, becoming greater, more balanced. And that most definitely in a literal sense. Chirality is thinking. A decisive, clear thought needs to have an intended chirality. The neurons themselves are chiral, and as our bodies are started constantly doing the chirality, and the more the healthier. So Heidegger is in this take pointing to a wholesomeness. And a refreshing of Thomasein and our inner child, if you like, which is like a naive expression. But here, think of it as the child of innocence of past times. Our possibility of being intellectual, which is very much under siege today. Why is that? Well, let's close up with one example. Without understanding chirality, we will be left with only up and down and all what I mentioned. What is that? Well, if we don't have access to this, that would be perceived by the thinking faculties and the bodies, that everything is relative, anything goes. Definitely the dark side of postmodernism. Nothing matters. Of course nothing matters. We don't have the original impetus that gives strength. We have only the secondary products, and those could actually be made by someone else. It's not hard to see that Heidegger is a philosopher of immense magnitude and insights. I thank you very much for your patience and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.
Thank you.